Hey folks, this is Rhykker with a Diablo 3 Season 29 Patch 2.7.6 Witch Doctor build guide. This guide will cover the new and improved Chicken Doctor, the now Clock-Eye Manajuma Angry Chicken Witch Doc. This build got turbo buff for Season 29. Currently it's on the PTR, still on the test server, but it's performing really well and it's lots of fun both for speed farming and for Greater Rift pushing. In this guide, we're going to go over the gear, the skills, and the playstyle that you want to rock this build. We'll also note that right now it is on the test server, but when the season launches, maxroll.gg will have the final form, the most optimized setup for this build. The thing is, I'm leaving for Gamescom tomorrow, so I just had a couple hours to put this together. I wanted to get this out to you folks to show you just how fun and powerful this build is. With just a few hours on the PTR, I'm only Paragon 715, but I am position 29 on the leaderboards. I did a tier 118 Greater Rift. Other people have taken this build even further with a bit more effort. The gameplay footage you're seeing is a GR pushing setup, but the speedrunning setup is even more fun because literally you're just always a chicken and things are always exploding and dying around you. So let's start with an overview of the gear that you're going to want. Now, first off, you need the Manajuma set. This is the main hand and the off hand. And this makes your Hex Angry Chicken explosion damage increased by 2000% and slain enemies trigger an additional explosion. Also, Angry Chicken lasts 15 seconds and your move speed is increased by an additional 100% while gaining 75% damage reduction. That 75% damage reduction, that is new with this patch and it is so critical to allowing this build to actually perform well in Greater Rifts. Also, while you are an Angry Chicken, you spawn a chicken every half second, used to be a second, so we're getting twice as many chickens now, that seeks out enemies and deals 100% of your Angry Chicken explosion damage, used to be 25%. So, some serious buffs to the Manajuma set. Then the other crucial piece of gear here that's getting buffed, you're going to put this in the cube, it's the Clock-Eye, an item that has been useless for all eternity other than just being a meme item that shoots out a chicken. Now, Angry Chicken turns all your pets into exploding chickens. Chickens deal 200% increased damage, and Angry Chicken deals 50% more damage per exploded chicken. So those are mandatory, and then another mandatory gear set we'll want is the Arachyr set. 2-piece bonus, doesn't really matter. We're actually not really caring about the spiders, but just to tell you what it does, it summons a spider queen that is attached to you by a thread. That's the 2 set. The 4 set, Spider Queen leaves behind webs that last for 15 seconds. They slow enemies, and you take 75% less damage while you are in the web and for 4 seconds after. So in the gameplay, you're going to want to be going into those webs to get that damage reduction. And then the 6-piece makes our Hex Angry Chicken deal 25%. No, not 25%, 25,000%. This is D3, not D4. 25,000% more damage. So those are all the mandatory pieces of gear that bring in all of our relevant multipliers. Now, outside of that, to bring in some additional damage, you're going to want a Ring of Emptiness. You and your non-fetish pets deal up to 300% increased damage to enemies affected by either your Haunt or your Locust Swarm. You're going to need this to deal with Rift Guardians and Elites when you're pushing Greater Rifts. We're going to also work in a convention of elements. You gain a 200% increased damage to a singular element, rotating through all your elements every 4 seconds. This is a poison build, so we're going to be, again, when pushing Greater Rifts, popping our explosion in our poison window. We're going to go with a Squirt's Necklace. While not taking damage, damage dealt is increased by up to 100%, and damage taken is increased by up to 50%. We're trying not to take damage. St. Archu's Gauge. We just don't have many good options for gloves. The first time an elite pack damages you, gain an absorb shield equal to 150% of your max life for 10 seconds. This is going to pair nicely with our Squirt's Necklace because as long as it is our absorb shield taking the damage, then we don't lose our Squirt's Necklace buff. And you might be wondering, well, we only have 5 pieces of Arachyrs, what's going on? That's because in our cube we're also taking a Ring of Royal Grandeur. Reduces the number of items needed for set bonuses by 1. Because of that, we're also working in the Guardian set. Now, Guardian's actually going to be MVP of this season because of the reduction in the Paragon cap. We cannot stack as much main stat via Paragon, therefore getting it via Guardians is going to be so much more important. Typically, Guardians is very useful early season. Now it's early season for everyone all the time. Hooray. To clarify, you are now capped at 800 Paragon. At least that's what it is right now on PTR. I would not be surprised if by the time this launches, it's going to be 1,000 or even up to 2,000. But even if that's the case, Guardians will still remain best in slot at least until 1,000 Paragon, probably up to 2,000 Paragon. But again, Maxwell.gg will have the optimized setup by the time Season 29 releases, and I'll still be in Germany, unfortunately. But what does Guardians do? Your 2 set. Your melee damage reduction is increased by 1% per 1,000 base vitality from equipped items. So that does not include Paragon and does not include augments. Your missile damage reduction is increased by 1% per 1,000 base strength, dex, or int. And the 3 set, you gain an additional 100% of your base strength, dex, int, and vitality attributes from equipped items. So doubling all the values of the vitality, etc. on your gear. Then lastly, in our cube, we're going to take a Lakumba's Ornament. Reduce all damage taken by 60% if your Soul Harvest stack is at least 1, and an additional 2% for each stack of Soul Harvest. Standard Witch Doctor setup. So that is the gear overview. We're going to go over exactly what we want on every piece of gear in a bit, but first, let's take a look at our skill setup. So obviously we need Hex Angry Chicken. Transform into an Angry Chicken for up to 2 seconds. Actually gets transformed into 15 seconds. That can explode for a bunch of damage as poison to all enemies. This is what makes us a poison build, and obviously this entire set revolves around Hex. So you want to be in your Hex, in your Angry Chicken form as much as possible while traveling around. In this setup, you're actually going to be dealing damage just as a chicken, in fact, and we'll explain why in a bit, but you can also pop your chicken form prematurely to cause a big explosion when you are in poison rotation on your convention. Next, we're going to take Spirit Barrage Manitou, and this is the key. Before you pop into Hex, you pop your Spirit Barrage Manitou. Summons a specter that hovers above you, unleashing spirit bolts at nearby enemies for a bunch of damage. Now, Manitou counts as a pet, and that is why it is buffed by our set and our Cluckai and everything. That's why it works perfectly into this setup. So you're going to pop your Manitou, you're going to get into your Hex, and then you're dealing big damage just from your Spirit Barrage, which is now benefiting from all of these buffs. Again, for speedruns, Spirit Barrage is going to kill stuff by itself. You don't even have to pop your Hex. Alright, next we're going to take Soul Harvest Languish, Standard Witch Doctor. Defensive and offensive buff goes with our Lakumba's Ornament Bracers. Feed on life force of enemies within 18 yards. Gain 3% int for 30 seconds for each affected enemy. This effect stacks up to 5 times. And increase your armor by 10% per harvested enemy and reduce their move speed. So we want to have 5 stacks of Soul Harvest at all times. Or at least you want to have 1 stack at all times at the very least. So once you enter a Greater Rift, a Rift, whatever, you pop your Spirit Barrage first to have that shooting off. Then as soon as you approach enemies, you pop Soul Harvest, then you pop into Hex. Once you're in Hex, you can do nothing else other than explode. So you want to make sure you get your Soul Harvest running first. Next, we're going to take Spirit Walk. The exact rune here doesn't really matter. You have options, is what it comes down to. So we're taking Healing Journey here just because in GRs sometimes I needed that extra little potion. But Spirit Walk just necessary as a mobility option. Healing Journey gives you 15% of your life back, but other typical options would be Jaunt. This increases the duration of Spirit Walk. We also see Severance, which increases your move speed while in Spirit Walk. Maybe for speedrunning, you might want to go with Severance. For GR pushing, I don't see this being as important. As the chicken, we're moving very fast all the time, but for pushing the GRs, I did like Healing Journey. Next, we want Locust Swarm Pestilence. Now remember, we have that Ring of Emptiness. We're going to be dealing quadruple damage, plus 300% is quadruple damage, to enemies under the effects of Locust Swarm. And we're taking Locust Swarm even though it's a heavy mana hit, because Locust Swarm is guaranteed to jump to 2 additional enemies instead of 1. So you cast this once, it's going to affect 3 enemies, and this is especially useful for dealing with Rift Guardians and Elites Champions when in Greater Rifts. So typically, while you're just running around and you're dealing with trash, you're probably not going to be triggering Locust Swarm very often. However, Once you are out of Hex, either because you have triggered it yourself or because it has expired on its own, what's your rotation? You pop your Spirit Barrage again to refresh that, because it goes 20 seconds. You pop your Soul Harvest to refresh that, to ensure you're at your max stack. Then you can also pop your Locust Swarm, especially if there is any elite on screen. You definitely pop Locust Swarm. If there's not an elite on screen, it's not as important to pop Locust Swarm, because you're probably just going to be either killing stuff instantly because it's a speed run and you don't need the extra damage, or because you're going to be running over to the next elite pack and the Locust Swarm won't spread all that way fast enough. But definitely critical against Rift Guardians, and when you're facing anything that's slowing you down. If anything is going to take more than one rotation to die, again, generally champions in GR pushing. Now, the last one here, I've seen people using Wall of Death. This was a surprise to me. Typically, you go with Piranha's Pyranado, and maybe that will end up being the optimal choice. It would not surprise me. Piranha's Pyranado is an excellent crowd control. It groups enemies. It's a hard CC, but the reason that Wall of Death, Wall of Zombies seems to be working so well is that this will block enemies. This really does help keep you alive, and something that I just have not had the chance to test yet, but again, Maxwell.gg will have the answers in the end. I'm under the impression that it is possible that Wall of Zombies, the zombies count as pets, and therefore, again, against Rift Guardians or the tough fights, will serve as additional bonus with our chickens. That's just a theory. Again, haven't had a chance to test, but answers will come. For our passives, we're going to take Circle of Life. When an enemy dies within 20 yards, there's a chance that a zombie dog will automatically emerge. Why do we want zombie dogs? Because they turn into extra chickens for extra damage. Confidence Ritual. You deal 25% additional damage to enemies within 20 yards. We are going to want to stay relatively close to enemies because we're going to be working in certain legendary gems. We're going to take, so we should be benefiting from this very often, at least against the Rift Guardians and the champions. Pierce the Veil. All your damage is increased by 20%, but your mana costs are increased by 30%. That doesn't matter too much because most of our damage is not coming from actual mana spenders. We're not spending mana very often, so this is great. Creeping Death. Your Haunt, Locust Swarm, and damage amp from Piranhas lasts almost forever. This really helps with the spreading of Locust Swarm and not having to pop it again and again against Rift Guardians, so it's not going to be just 8 seconds that you got to pop this over and over again. Since again, the duration of one chicken rotation is longer than 8 seconds. As for exactly what you want on every piece of gear, on your shoulders, you're going to want Intelligence, Vitality, Life percent, and then, you see I got All Resist. You want area damage instead. Then if you can get Pickup Radius as a secondary, wherever you can, it's a great idea. On your helm, Intelligence, Vitality, Crit Chance, and this build doesn't need a whole lot of cooldown, so you can go with an Amethyst for more life. Might end up that you're going to want a Diamond in the end for cooldown, but again, this build isn't super cooldown dependent. On your squirts, Poison, Crit, Crit. On your gloves, Intelligence, Crit, Crit, area damage. Your chest, Intelligence, Vitality, armor. Your bracers, Poison, Intelligence, Vitality, Crit Chance. Your belt, Intelligence, Vitality, Life, armor. Your pants, Intelligence, Vitality, armor. The sockets in your chest and pants will be topazes for more intelligence. For your boots, Intelligence, Vitality, armor, and move speed. And this is because now the rules of Paragon and capping out your move speed have changed. So you actually now do want to get move speed on your boots. The alternative, however, would be All Resist. On your rings, Crit Chance, Crit Damage, and then go with Intelligence. You can go with area damage. Typically, we would not want to keep Intelligence anywhere when we can roll off something else. Why? Because with sufficient Paragon, you can just make up for that Intelligence. Now the rules are changing with this new Paragon cap, so keeping some Intelligence in some places might be more beneficial. That said, with Kaldison's Despair, you can still stack back on a whole lot of Intelligence. But the exact optimizations and the tweakings of how much int versus how much either cooldown or perhaps area damage you might want to stack in different places might change with Season 29. For your weapon, percent damage, intelligence, and then area damage. For your offhand, damage, intelligence, vitality, crit chance, and area damage. For your legendary gems, Bane of the Trapped. At level 25, this makes us emit a crowd-controlling aura, and it's going to also increase our damage against crowd-controlled enemies. This is why we're taking Confidence Ritual, so that we're dealing more damage to enemies close to us, because we also want to be dealing more damage to enemies close to us because of the Bane of the Trapped. Now, paradoxically, we're also taking a Zaeith's Stone of Vengeance. Damage you deal is increased for every 10 yards between you and the enemy hit. Max 30% increase at 50 yards. So the key with Zaeith's is that you benefit from the minimum stack no matter how close an enemy is. This also gives us a 20% chance on hit to stun the enemy for 1 second at level 25. Nice little extra bit of CC. But we're also benefiting from Zaeith's more than just those enemies close to us, because our Manitou is shooting out all over the screen, so we're going to be hitting stragglers and dealing more damage against them. And then lastly, for Greater Rift pushing a Bane of the Stricken. You're really going to slow down against the Rift Guardian. This is going to help. 25% increased damage against Rift Guardians, and each attack you make against an enemy increases the damage it takes from your attacks by a certain percent. You can see my gems are ranked 25 here, and again, I got, I did a GR 118 with rank 25 gems. So the more you attack an enemy, the more you gain an accelerating damage buff against them. If you're doing speedruns, you do not take a Bane of the Stricken. Bane of the Powerful instead. It's going to give you a buff against elites, champions, bosses, 15%, and it's also going to then give you a 20% damage buff after you've defeated one of these for, could be a minute, could be 2 minutes as you level it up. For speedruns, this is so much better than Bane of the Stricken. Do not take Bane of the Stricken if your runs are taking under 5 minutes, only if it's taking you more than 10 minutes, only when you are pushing Greater Rifts. Now, for the Paragon, this is where everything is changing significantly. I've put everything into move speed, however, I think that's actually a mistake for Greater Rift pushing. Why? We're in chicken form, we're already moving super fast. This should probably all go into intelligence. Again, maxroll.gg will have you covered for the exact optimized setup. But my theory is everything into intelligence. For offense, I've currently put everything into cooldown reduction. Again, the rules are changing on how much we can stack. We can now stack up to 200 points, so it's not going to be putting everything and maxing out every category. We can now, if we wanted to, put everything into one category. So in my case, instead of getting cooldown on my gear, I'm getting it all in my Paragon. It's possible we won't need cooldown, in which case it's probably going to go to crit chance and crit damage. And the thing about crit chance and crit damage, you want to bring up your stats here, details. So this is now becoming important again. Your ideal distribution of crit chance to crit damage is a ratio of 1 to 10. So if I have 50% crit chance, I want 500% crit damage. The fact that I have less than that means if I have the choice right now between getting more crit chance or more crit damage, I benefit more from getting more crit damage. If I had only 20% crit chance and 400% crit damage, I benefit more from what? More crit chance. So you would typically, in your Paragon, level that out that way. In my case, I would put into crit damage and nothing into crit chance. Right now, I've been experimenting with cooldown, simply because, especially in Greater Rift pushing, after you manually pop your chicken, you will be waiting for the cooldown on your Hex for some amount of time, and I found that when I had no cooldown at all, it was kind of too long, so I've been pumping my cooldown here. And now the time that I'm out of chicken is long enough or short enough to maintain my buffs and not have my damage reduction drop off and be able to get into my next rotation. But again, max roll will have the optimized setup in time for season launch. Defense, I've been experimenting pumping everything into life. As an intelligence-based class, you are stacking a lot of intelligence. Intelligence turns into all resist, so you don't really need all resist. Maybe we'll need some armor. But the thing is, our Guardians doubles our vitality. That gives us more life, so then multiplying our life even further just seems like a really good idea. Lastly, in utility, I've been blasting everything into area damage. We don't need resource cost reduction. Arguably, you can use some bigger radius, but it's not going to be nearly as important as area damage, so blasting out that area damage is going to help with clearing density of enemies. For your follower, it's going to be the standard follower setups, as we've seen in the past. For gear, you want to put gear on your follower that will emanate to you. So, Nemesis Bracers, when you click on a shrine, you're going to emanate to you. Spawn enemy champions. Flavor of Time, very important. Pylon effects last twice as long, emanates to you. Oculus Ring, also very important. Chance to create an area focused power on killing a monster. When you stand in that golden circle, you deal more damage. So you'll notice in the gameplay that when that golden circle spawns, I try to stand in it and allow my mana to deal damage. But of course, it's a balance game between standing in that circle for, you can get up to an 85% damage buff, which is very significant, or benefiting from your Bane of the Trapped and your Confidence Ritual. Generally, Oculus is going to win out until you're really stacking those higher level gems. You want the token that makes your follower invulnerable if you are pushing Greater Rifts. If you feel you can maintain your follower being alive and they're not dying, then instead you can go for follower gains access to every skill. In order to keep your follower alive, you gotta stack a ton of their main stat and vitality, especially vitality. Across their gear though, you do want to be stacking main stat in order to maximize their skills. So in my case with the Templar, I took heal to give me that extra potion. I took loyalty to get a little bit of life regen. Onslaught in order to make the enemies take 10% increased damage. That's a buff that helps us. And actually here, I forgot to change to Guardian. Guardian is the better setup when you take fatal damage. That's your extra life. That's your extra life. You don't actually need the spirit regeneration. And that's going to wrap up this video. Again, this was recorded on the test server, so things are still subject to change. But right now the build is lots of fun. And we'll see if any changes are made to the build before the Season 29 goes live. No current start date for Season 29. But sound off in the comments, folks. Are you excited for Diablo 3 Season 29? Are you planning to play? Are you going to try out the Witch Doctor? Let's hear your thoughts. Thanks for watching. Special thanks to my Twitch, Patreon, and YouTube supporters for making these videos possible. If you enjoyed this video, please share it, check out these other videos, and subscribe to join Rhykkers Raiders for more Diablo content.